session, we'll be exploring how to create safeguarding plans. We've recently updated the information on the Child Protection in Sport Unit website. We'd like to share this with you as we go to support the journey. Now, my name's Jude Toseland and I'm a senior consultant at the Child Protection in Sport Unit, and we'll be benefiting from the experience of my colleagues, Denise Richards and Amy Clark. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Denise, do you want to say who you are and a bit about your role?
Yes, thanks, Jude. I used to work at an active partnership as a lead officer. So obviously developed safeguarding plans for over a period of about 12 years. So experience from that side, I guess, but also I have assessed organisations safeguarding plans as well in my role at the Child Protection in Sport Unit.
Thanks, Denise. And Amy, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself too?
Yeah, my name's Amy Clark. I'm a training and development consultant here at the Child Protection Sport Unit. I'm still relatively new, joined last November. Part of my role is supporting NGBs and active partnerships in regards to things like creating safeguarding plans and other safeguarding elements within their organisations. I also happen to be a safeguarding officer for a football academy, so I've also got some experience of developing these things myself. My background is actually in children's social work, so I have some knowledge from that as well.
That's great. So we've got a multitude of experience from various different settings today. So the aim of the session is going to be to provide you with information and resources to enable you to write your own safeguarding plans. What we're going to be covering is how to write a safeguarding plan. That's right from getting started through to bringing the plan to life. How to write both training and communication plans, and we'll go into more detail. Sometimes they're part of the overall safeguarding plan, sometimes they're separate plans. We're also going to look at what some of the common mistakes are in plans and how you can avoid those. And finally, finding out some further resources, templates, guidance on our website, and I'll show you where to find those too. So hopefully by the end of the short recording, you'll have picked up some pointers to help you with your own plans. So we'll start by asking, what do we mean by a safeguarding plan? I wonder if Denise, if you've got any thoughts about what a safeguarding plan means for you.
For me, it's always looking at what you're going to do in terms of your safeguarding work across the organisation for the coming years. Some people do write plans for 2 years or a little bit longer, but obviously you need ongoing monitoring however long you write your plan for. And we're going to look at some tools to use about what you would put in your plan. But for me, it's about what are the things that you absolutely must do, what has happened in the last year that you've learned from that needs to go in your safeguarding plan. So changes that you need to make, possibly to policies and procedures where you've learned from cases and concerns. And a real priority as well is, what haven't you completed from last year's safeguarding plan? Because that needs to be addressed as soon as possible. And what are your ongoing maintenance items? For example, you might check the safeguarding content on the website every year to make sure it's up to date and all the links work. So what sort of things do you do year on year as your basic safeguarding maintenance? And then finally, for me, it's around what are your developments for the coming year, maybe because you're doing new projects that require different safeguarding interventions, and what gaps are there in your organisation's safeguarding that you absolutely must address.
Thanks, Denise. Have you got anything to add to that, Amy? Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think for me, when thinking about safeguarding plans and communication and training plans, it's about what you're trying to achieve for your organisation, and also taking learning not only from your own experiences and things that possibly have happened within your own organisation, but learning from other things that have happened. So for example, we've recently had the White Review out that's had lots of kind of recommendations about how to create a safer safeguarding culture, if you like, and for me, I think that has to be at the heart of it, is creating a space that people feel comfortable coming into, where they're going to feel valued and listened to, and that they're going to feel like they're understood and that their needs come before those of the sport and or the organisation. And I think that's why when we're talking about safeguarding plans, we have to think about the bigger strategy and what you're actually trying to achieve as an organisation. And that's why things like mission statements and values that your organisation are based around are essential, really, to allow you to kind of frame and build that culture.
I think you raised something really important there around the difference between strategy and plan. So because there is some confusion between a safeguarding strategy and a safeguarding plan. So the strategy addresses the strategic vision to address safeguarding right across the organisation, and that is around embedding that safeguarding culture. Whereas the plan is how you do that, how you actually get there. So it's important to include plans for training and for communication within that, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later on. So how do we get started? How do we start writing a safeguarding plan? And Amy, any hints and tips here?
Yeah, I think this can be quite overwhelming, especially if it's something new to you and that you're coming into, and sometimes actually if you're picking up someone else's plan and you're not really sure kind of what to do with that or where to start. For me, I think I used the Child Protection and Sport Unit self-assessment tools, which I know you've got the links for there, and found those really useful as a starting point. I think for me, it's important to kind of identify the key areas that you want to address for your organisation. I certainly found RAG rating them helpful. So, for example, red ones are absolute immediate that need doing immediately. You've got your amber ones that might be a bit of a longer kind of projects working towards, and then you've got your green ones that you're meeting, but actually what maintenance is there to make sure that they stay green. So things like that I think are really useful. Again, don't sit down and try and do this all on your own. It's really important that you seek advice, whether that's from other people within your organisation, other organisations. You know, everyone's been in this boat before and has had to create these plans, so draw on other people's experience. And another, I suppose, useful starting point for me was any recommendations that do come from kind of any audits or kind of annual reviews or anything like that. I always think that's a good starting point.
Yeah, that's great. Denise, anything you'd like to add to what Amy said?
Just that I guess part of the process is that you review your plan. So you should be looking at last year's plan. And I know some people, especially when they get new posts, they decide to virtually start again in terms of the formatting and things like that. But your last year's plan is a place where you can start to see what, as I said earlier, you are using in terms of maintenance items to put in that plan, things that you didn't do last year as well. And that's part of your monitoring and reviewing process that as an organisation you should be doing. And that can help to set the template of then where you move on. And then it's talking, as Amy said, to the wider team and looking at projects for the coming year and what safeguarding interventions you might need to make on those projects. And some you can identify, and others might mean the plan is very dynamic in terms of you add things to the plan as the year progresses and as you get more familiar with projects and as things crop up in terms of learning and interventions that you might need to make in terms of safeguarding.
Yeah, you both are talking a lot around the whole self-assessment process, and that's often based on both learning across the organisation, reviews like Amy mentioned, the White Review, but also looking back at what you've done in the past year and looking back at your previous plan. And we have got some resources on our website that can help you. So we've got two self-assessment tools. There's the Essential tool, which is designed for clubs, community organisations. And then if you are working through or you've achieved the CPSU safeguarding standards, the extended tool is a good resource for you, and you can actually use them to help to look at what you've got at the moment and then from there go on to write your plan. But plans shouldn't be written by one person on their own, but drawn together in consultation with others. So who do you think should be consulted with to write the plan, Denise?
I always think this is sometimes a difficult one for organisations because you know, it's not a case of sending out your draft plan and getting people to comment on it. Great if you can, but normally people just haven't got the capacity, or maybe don't know all the detail of your organisation's safeguarding. But really, you should talk internally, have it on team meetings, have it on board meetings, so that people are involved in the plan within the organisation. And then outside, people do go to forums, have different networks who they work with. You should be able to present an overview of your plan and sell to people and communicate with people what your organisation does in terms of safeguarding, without necessarily having to go into every detail, just so people can feedback, but also be aware of what this organisation is doing. And we are going to talk later about communication, but I do think part of that is your consultation, because getting messages out there about this is what we do in terms of safeguarding as an organisation. And if you also commission other organisations to deliver activities on your behalf, or you give them grant aid funding or something like that, then you ought to have criteria in there in any service level agreements where they need to consult with children and young people and parents and others about safeguarding and about how safe the activities are and about any feedback that they've got. Because often some organisations don't work directly with children and young people, but the opportunity is there with those people you fund to get them to get the views of children and young people and others, and feed those back into your organisation, so that you can then look to future projects and see again what any changes that you might need to make in terms of both the delivery of the activity and any safeguarding changes that you might need to make it that much stronger in terms of health and safety and safeguarding for children and young people.
And you've covered quite a lot of what's on this slide already. Anything you'd like to add to that, Amy?
So for me, you know, especially when you're thinking about the children and young people accessing these organisations, they are the best people to tell us about what makes them feel safe and welcome, and how they can get the best out of the sport. And so it's important to try and get that kind of feedback as regularly as possible, really. And again, not doing it in isolation. So these conversations happen as regularly as possible. It might be that you know, if you're having regular team meetings, that you bring that feedback to these team meetings and talk about how you can then kind of start to use that to implement your plan and shape your safeguarding plan, so that everyone is clear about what needs to happen next, really.
Absolutely. And so you've done your self-assessment and you've consulted with relevant people, but how do you actually sit down and write the plan itself? I'll start with Amy this time. What tips do you have?
Again, I think it's about, for me, I use the RAG rating process to identify the action points that needed to happen immediately and within a very clear time scale. And got those down first, and then kind of built on that. There are resources on the website, which I'm sure you'll talk through, in terms of templates for plans if you don't actually have one to work from previously. Again, I think try not to sit and do this on your own. You can do this with a colleague and or maybe do separate parts and then bring it together. But yeah, don't sit down and do this in isolation. The plan needs to have a collaborative approach. And I guess really when you start writing the plan, for me, the thing to keep in mind is that this isn't just a tick box exercise. You're not just doing this to kind of get through an audit or what have you. What you need to think about is, how is this action plan going to contribute to improving our organisation? How are we going to make the people that access our organisation feel safe, feel secure, and want to kind of be here and participate? So for me, it's you know, that has to be at the heart of it. What impact is it actually going to have, and how is it going to improve your organisation?
What would you say, Denise, to help people to write the plan?
A lot of people do plans in very different ways. So some people use headings from some standards or criteria that they may be assessed against. Some develop from their own criteria, for example, leadership, training, communication, consulted children and people. And so under those headings, then people put in actions. But as Amy said, really, it's a case of, whose name is it at the side of each of those actions? And sometimes different members of the team have expertise against particular areas. And leadership, for example, you would expect the board to be very involved in, what is happening in terms of leadership and in terms of safeguarding. So you need to engage the board in that particular element, even though they need to see, the wider plan. How do you engage the wider team? How do you make sure when they're doing a project, they think on their project plan, safeguarding? Safeguarding is a heading in their generic project plan. They think about safeguarding and they look at what interventions they are going to make in their project plan, but also that needs to feed into the wider safeguarding plan as well. And is there any new work that's come out of any concerns or any new projects? And as I said before, really important, have your priorities that have come out of things that you didn't get done from last year's plan that you absolutely probably need to do first.
Yeah, I think you're both describing a real living document, a plan that is being used kind of regularly and referred to regularly. We do have some guidance on our website, as Amy mentioned, and there's a link here, and we've got information and a template here as well that you can download, so you can use that template for your plan, or you might want to use it as a way of getting started with writing your plan, because you might have your own specific ways to address that plan. Now, we hear a lot about SMART plans, and SMART, what this means is that plans need to be specific, so they need to be clear and very concrete. They also need to be measurable, so you need clear data that can be measured against, and that helps you to track any changes as you go. They need to be achievable. So you might want to break goals down into smaller actions, or you might want to think about what are the tasks actually realistic and shared out across the team. They need to be relevant, and they need to be practical about what can be achieved and what resources is needed. And they also need to be time bound. So you need clear timescales and deadlines so that you can stay on track with your plan. So, Denise, what would you recommend to keep a plan SMART?
Making sure that you're not, vague. So you wouldn't put, for example, we're going to train everyone in safeguarding, because, it's a great ambition. Of course it is, but it's not any of those things. It's not very specific. It's not achievable, to be honest. So you need to be very specific about what does that look like. So if it was, for example, training, which links to your training plan, who are you going to train? Is it internal workforce? Are you going to offer something to external partners? How many courses or workshops are you going to do? What are there? How many do you plan to do for that year? Who's going to organise them? By the end of the year, how many potentially do you expect that you will have done, or how many people might you think that you might have trained? And what resources might you need to deliver that training program? So being very, very specific about what you're doing. And some things you're not going to know exactly every detail about what you're going to do, but just being as specific as you possibly can be. And again, because we talked about the plan being dynamic, go in and change things. If you identify a different type of safeguarding training or safeguarding intervention to what is in your plan, go in, change your plan, amend it, but again, still keep it SMART. Still keep it within that box, and not just vague statements about that are sort of aspirational, I guess, which is all very laudable, but it doesn't mean you can get at the end of the year and think, right, this is what we've achieved, this is the impact we've made, these are the changes as a result of what we've done, because it's not SMART if it's vague.
It's interesting because I've definitely seen some plans where there's been some mistakes there. If I kind of look at some of these measures, the SMART, so specific, I've seen some really vague plans. So this is a mistake to try and a kind of thing to try and avoid. So you may have a plan that says we want to involve children and young people, but it doesn't say how how they're going to do it. It doesn't say who's going to do that, and it doesn't say when they're going to be done. It's going to be done by. So that needs to be broken down into stages. So it may be that involving children, young people, maybe we are going to use this event to consult with a group of children and young people. We're going to do this with the outcome of this information, and we're going to use it to inform our plans going forward. So much more concrete steps that take each stage. And then look at achievable. I've quite often seen plans where it's only got a lead safeguarding officer or a designated lead beside every single action point, and that isn't realistic, that isn't achievable. So the plan needs to be spread out across the team. It needs to be delegated to relevant people, and as Denise said, there might be specific areas where you can clearly see it falls into the role of perhaps someone who leads on performance, perhaps somebody who's a senior manager, perhaps someone who's an activity provider. So you want to think about who's the most relevant person to lead on that.
I think it's like you said, Jude, I mean, that example you've given about getting the views of children and young people is very laudable and absolutely should be in a safeguarding plan, or providing or organising safeguarding training for the workforce, again, should be in a plan. But it's just very vague, and you're not saying how, who. So I think anything really where you've got like a sweeping statement that you're not breaking down, and it is an action plan really. So clear actions against that overall, because that's like your aspiration or what you want to achieve overall, that we've got the views of children and young people, or we've got a fully trained workforce, or we're offering a wide variety of training programs in terms of safeguarding to the wider workforce externally. But it's like, what sits underneath that? How we're going to do it, as you said, and just being very, very clear and specific. And I do think that is another part of embedding it in your team, because they will help you to make it smart, because they're often working on these projects on the ground. They know who and what and when and how, sometimes more than a lead officer might know.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything you want to add, Amy, or have we covered it all?
I think you've covered most of it. I think, when we think about, and I'll just use the same example because it's one we're talking about, but, getting listening to the children and young people, as Denise said, that's laudable, but why? And for what reason? And how are we going to use that? It's all well and good listening to them and hearing their voices and gathering that information, but then how are you going to use that to improve your organisation? So that essentially is what a safeguarding plan has to be, is how are you going to use that? How are you going to take these actions and use them to improve your organisation and make it a safer one?
Absolutely. So a communication plan, we mentioned it earlier, and it's important both to communicate the whole plan itself, as well as the various elements of the plans, the various areas within it. So, Amy, what makes a good communication plan, do you think?
I think for me, it has to be regular. And almost bite-sized. So some safeguarding plans are quite big documents, and if you were to just send that out to people, they probably take one look at it and be quite overwhelmed by the enormity of what the organisation is trying to achieve. So I think the key is to break down the key messages, the key points, the key things that you're trying to achieve, and share that information in the most accessible way possible, really, not only with colleagues within the organisation, so that you can bring that safeguarding plan to life and really get that buy-in, but also to your external stakeholders, the children and young people accessing your organisation, partners, other providers, and that kind of thing, because it's important to, I think it's also important to celebrate your successes, and kind of say, this is what we wanted to achieve, and this is what we've done, and we've achieved this now, but this is how we're going to move it forward, and constantly kind of be building on that.
Absolutely. And I know you've got quite a lot of experience around communication plans, Denise. What would you add?
if you're fortunate enough to have a marketing and communications officer, then this is absolutely where, you know, you need to make sure that they're involved, because sometimes they will have a wider communication plan, and safeguarding should be included as part of that wider communication plan. So if you've got a wider plan for the organisation, absolutely make sure safeguarding is reflected in that. If you've got a marketing communications officer, make sure this is part of their work programme, you know, that their manager has the safeguarding comms as part of their appraisal, as part of their plan for the year, as part of their work programme. And they can support you in terms of, you know, what messages do you want to get out, but also what medium do you want to use to get those messages out, because different groups respond or want to receive messages in certain formats depending on age or demographic or the diversity. And again, if you've got someone in that role, or somebody maybe in a wider equality, diversity and inclusion role, they may also be able to support you to make sure that your communications about safeguarding do reach the widest audience in the widest sense.
Absolutely. I think it's around that accessibility and making sure that that every time you put something in your plan, you also think about, okay, how are we going to communicate this? And we have got some guidance on the website on this side of things too, as well as around training plans, because some organisations have separate training plans and others incorporate them into their main plan. So Denise, what do you think should be included within a training plan?
In terms of your own organisation, internal workforce, I think that starts really with induction, having safeguarding training needs on every appraisal or supervision meeting, and letting people identify any training needs, you know, throughout the year. So it might be when people work on a particular project with a group they've not worked with before, that there might be different safeguarding work that might need to take place from that organisation. So giving staff the opportunity both to upskill themselves, but maybe they will need to upskill organisations that they're working with and identify training for the wider network who are delivering on their behalf, especially if they're commissioning others to deliver. So do you need to upskill people who you are commissioning or funding? And that might not always be a formal workshop. It might be webinars, podcasts, e-learning. And that's the thing. There's loads of different ways of in which people do like to receive information and like to learn. So I think it is in your training plans, having that training needs identified, but also that wide offer in terms of the various platforms.
Thank you. Amy, what would you like to add to what Denise has said?
I mean, I think Denise has given a pretty comprehensive answer there. I think as with, you know, when we're talking about the safeguarding plan, it has to be dynamic, it has to be continually updated. Safeguarding doesn't stand still, never has done, and is always evolving. There's always new developments, there's always new policies, there's new themes in terms of concerns and what's happening in kind of local communities and those more vulnerable. So I think it's just about making sure that it's that you've got your kind of, like Denise touched on there about inductions and basic safeguarding, that you've got your mandatory non-negotiable training that everyone has to do and has to access, but also the more kind of responsive reactive training in relation to kind of new legislation and themes and concerns that might have arisen.
Yes, and we do have some information about training needs analysis on our website, and we have a training plan template as well that you can access. And one thing I would say is sometimes organisations will come to me with a grid that says who needs to do what in terms of training, but they don't always say how they're going to get there, how they're going to monitor who's doing what, and how they're going to meet the gaps. So that's something to have a little bit of a think about. But obviously we don't want plans getting dusty and never looked at from year to year. So how do you keep plans alive, Amy?
I think for me, and like it says on the slide there, it's just that constant reviewing and evaluation, making sure that happens regularly. Like I touched on earlier, celebrating those successes. So when you have completed actions, kind of summarising how you've gone about that and the outcome of completing those actions, and kind of disseminating that information across the organisation. I think a really key part as well is we have a tendency to always focus on the things that we've not quite achieved yet and working towards those, but actually what's equally important is not letting slip the established kind of processes and procedures that you've got in place to ensure that, you know, your safeguarding standards are maintained, and just having, again, those regular conversations. And I think one of the themes that is coming through in this is the importance of doing this collaboratively, that you cannot be entirely, or one person should not be solely responsible for everything. However, I do think that there is a key person that should be identified to drive the safeguarding plan, and to make sure that people are held accountable for their part to play in that. And a part of that is going to be those regular conversations, having the safeguarding plan on the agenda for any team meetings, and things like that.
Yes, I've seen quite good examples where there's been a shared document that is routinely updated so everyone can access that shared document, but there may be a safeguarding review group, or like you say, within team meetings, within board meetings, where that is also triggered, that update each time. And I like the idea that Amy was talking about. I said about celebrating the good things too. So thinking about what you're doing well, doing more of it, thinking about where the gaps are and building those in. So we have quite a few resources on our website. We've talked about some of these. I'll just show you where to find these. So we have the guide to writing safeguarding plans, and this is found on the Child Protection Sport Unit website under Help and Advice. So you can see there are safeguarding plans, communication plans, and training plans. And we're going through a lot of what we've gone through today. And also, you'll see the self-assessment tools that we referred to. You can also access these directly from the website, and you can register to access those. And then also things like the templates that we referred to. You can download the templates to use for yourselves as well. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found this useful. I hope this inspires you to go away and create your own plan and review the plans that you've got at the moment. And if you want any further information, come to the Child Protection in Sport Unit website, and hopefully all the resources that you need are on there.